All right. Hello, hello, everyone.
Oh,
Welcome to another episode of the Artful Leader interview series. I just want to thank you so much for tuning in. You have so many options online nowadays, and so many conversations are happening. And I just really appreciate you, the watcher and the listener, for taking time to join this conversation. The Artful Leader interview series has been a wonderful way to capture the stories and the wisdom of folks who are really leading at the intersection of the arts, education, healing, and social justice. And this body of work is becoming a wonderful resource for those who are working in this field, with so many folks who are bringing different perspectives to how we make change in our world through the arts, how we educate young people, how we care for ourselves as practitioners. And my work is with Artful Leadership Coaching and Consulting. My name is Rochelle Archer. And my work is really about helping folks working in community arts ed and creative youth development and education to prioritize wellness and to really work from that place where wellness is centered, where we get to take care of ourselves, we get to take care of our relationships, and really change the way we do business in our communities so that everyone can flourish. And that is one of the reasons why I was so excited to bring our guest today, Katherine Hanna Schrock, into the conversation because she is really doing some juicy work at that intersection. And so, Katherine, thank you so much for saying yes
yeah,
and hopping in
of
this call
course.
with me today.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me and for creating this space for us all to exchange together.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, I'm not very good at doing the whole reading the bio thing, but Katherine has a long history of doing creative work that brings all kinds of folks into important conversations through creative processes and primarily through theater arts and poetry. And she's really reimagining herself in this new organization that she started, Imagine. And when I heard about what you were doing, I was like, wait a minute. I want to know more about that. Partly because I have a background in playback theater and working in communities and building community. And so I was like, ooh, I want to know more about that. So, Katherine, why don't you just introduce yourself to us? Tell us a little bit about who you are and your work and what you're creating right now with this new initiative.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, again, happy to be here. Katherine, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I call myself an applied theater practitioner, which is sort of a formal term, but really it is working at the intersection of theater and human development. From a professional perspective, I call myself also a culture worker. I deeply believe that culture is something that is constantly changing and that it is malleable. And as artists, we have this incredible opportunity to influence culture, to change culture, and to invite people into that experience of asking the question, what are we content with how things are, and what can change, and what are the possibilities for how we can create change together. I'm very much a facilitator. I think that is a word that I connect to deeply, even just in, I think, in my way of being in the world, but really vocationally too. I'm a facilitator. I love the journey of giving and taking and being responsive. And as we kind of delve into some of the kinds of work, I can share more about facilitation.
Mm-hmm.
I've been, I think, like you, perhaps, Rochelle, in the sort of teaching artist sphere for 20 years. And so I come from that real like teaching artist roots. I also, even from, even as I'm supervising and running programs with teaching artists, I'm coming in with the lens of a teaching artist. And I'd love to share more about that because I believe deeply in advocating for teaching artists as well. Yeah, I'm a designer of experiences for humans of all ages. On a personal level, I'm an immigrant woman. I was born in Egypt. I'm North African. um, American Egyptian, and I think that I really resonate with the spaces in between, you know, the kind of that I have inherited being a bicultural person, and coming from the perspective of being historically marginalized while also being deeply invested in bridging, and the curiosity around how theater can also bridge us together. I also come from like generations of very compassionate women. So I've learned like love in all things, and just empathy and ongoing forgiveness and never turning humans down, has been just something that I was brought up with, is a real radical love. Yeah, and so in this moment of my life, I co-founded Imagine with my partner, last summer. So this is very much a time of transition in a way, but kind of coming out of the old and really moving into this birthing the new. But transitions are moments of grief too, and so I feel like I'm carrying, you know, and thinking about, kind of what is of the moment. I'm sort of putting away grief and entering into this, liberation. So the term liberation, the word liberation, is very close to my heart, and I think it's very much part of the work that it's the work that I'm trying to create through Imagine. So recently, I heard an interview with, Mirabai Starr, who is a spiritualist and teacher and activist, but she said, we must create the conditions for liberation. And I feel like, when I heard that, it just really stuck in my mind, of just the question of what are the conditions for liberation, and how can we co-create that together, you know, as educators, as artists, as community workers, culture workers. So Imagine, I'm looking to investigate that question. What we say is that we are creating new ways of being together through theater.
Mm.
And yeah, our interest is in social development and learning and human connection. And we work in schools, and we work in nonprofits. We work sometimes creating kind of new programs, just as like creative consultants,
Mhm.
just listening to what is the objective. For example, as I know you worked at Monarch, School, Monarch asked us to be a part of a love show. And just like, what are some ways you want to accompany a show about love? And so,
Mhm.
you know, through conversations with them and through some of my collaborators, we, picked up some ideas about that. In fact, it includes some playback theater and some like kind of flash mob style dancing and singing, some spoken word too. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I guess the last thing I'll say as I introduce Imagine, is it, um, you know, so again, we're in the beginning. I don't believe in, arrivals, really. I think my personality is, not just my personality, but my belief system, my framework is around, we are always growing and changing, and that's the thing about culture, as I was saying, like that we can shift it. And so I'm creating programs, like this, like the play program, like, which is a social emotional theater. I'm creating curriculum, creating structures, but I feel like the defining quality that I'm really interested in is in structures, programs that have space, have a sort of spaciousness, that are still like, that are limber enough to adapt to the spaces that we're in, to
Mhm.
be responsive. And again, that connects with the facilitation piece. So yeah, that's a little bit of an intro to kind of me and what I'm interested in doing with Imagine and who we are at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, there's so many avenues we could go in just from like all the rich things that you just brought into this space. And I resonate a lot with what you're talking about of facilitation because that's my work as well, and inviting people into these important dialogues and creating these kind of sacred spaces where we can kind of set aside maybe our usual way of doing things and enter a really meaningful discourse that's actually helpful to move our community towards,
Yes.
wellness and liberation and some of those things that you're talking about. So I'm just so excited to hear that you're taking that on, and I'm really curious just what that is looking like. I mean, you shared a little bit about what that's looking like at the show at Monarch, but when you're like going into organizations or different spaces like that and bringing theater into these spaces, what does that look like, and how are folks responding to that? I'm so curious to hear.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there are, a few kind of key practices or methods that I've been investing in all my life that I feel like also really are conducive to this facilitator's space. So forum theater is a type of theater that I'm deeply passionate about, and it is an avenue or a branch of theater of the oppressed,
Mhm.
but essentially what we do. So for example, I have a forum theater anti-racism play,
Mhm.
and what we do is we show a play, like a 35-minute play that is actually inspired by multiple true stories of people who've experienced bias or prejudice in the workplace. And then people watch it as a straight play, and then we then the play ends in tragedy. So it's like it offers the opposite of what theater usually does, that catharsis. It actually makes us very unsettled, as and makes the audience very unsettled, because it's meant to provoke action, to
Mhm.
provoke change, to create this discomfort intentionally,
Yeah.
but then the question becomes, what happened? What
Mhm.
did you all see? What were the institutional systemic factors at play that created this tragic outcome, whereby essentially a Black woman loses her job? What
Mhm.
were the interpersonal things happening that
Mhm.
could have that also contributed to this trajectory?
Yeah.
So then what happens is we're suddenly in this like open field,
Yeah.
because I don't know what's going to happen. I have a structure, obviously I have a structure, but I'm really then basing it on what people are seeing. I mean, prior to that, we do a lot of like fertilizing the ground, making sure people kind of feel ready and connected
Mhm.
to each other, and that's a big part of that. But yeah, then it really does become a space where we're just responding to the observations that they make. um, and then what happens is we then invite them into a role play process. So then we say, okay, we've looked at, what are some of the institutional factors that contributed, what are the interpersonal. Now if you see something that one of these characters could have said or done differently in these like in these small scene moments, then stop the play.
Mhm.
And then we have them stop the play, and we bring them into the play. They replace an actor, and they role play something that might have been said or done differently. And we celebrate them no matter what they do, but we also continue to use that as a way to advance a conversation, to keep discovering, so it's very fluid, it's very organic, it's very emotional, I think, at times too.
Yeah.
I remember you posting, I think you posted something on Artful Leadership that was like, growth is messy and ugly, and
Yeah.
and I'm like, that's really what we are putting out there. And
Yeah.
we have a children's version called Safa Story, and we have an adult version, which
Mhm.
the play itself is called Brea Story. But it's very nerve-wracking, but it's also, I've only ever seen it really invigorate people. I've seen discoveries about like authentic kind of human moments, and what, and with real action of what can be done more in that style using theater than anywhere else in my own work. So
Yeah.
that's one example.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think that that is so powerful when we're able to sort of engage in these imaginary spaces
Mhm.
where we can try on different ways of handling situations, knowing that, we're connecting so much to others' stories, but it allows us to kind of like distance from our own experience and see it in action in front of us, and then
Mhm.
try out different ways of being. I think is so important, and that's
Yeah.
just such a powerful role I think that the arts can play in social change. And when folks can actually step into the play and try
Yeah.
on different things, and then we can see, well, how did that work for us?
Yeah, exactly. And it's so while it's inspired by true stories, and that's intentional, it's inspired by
Yeah,
true stories because we want people to take it seriously and to know
yeah,
that like this is reality, but it's actually fictionalized too. So it's not my
yeah,
story. It's not your story, per
yeah,
se. Things
right,
might feel familiar,
right,
but that allows, again, to what you're saying, that allows that imaginative space where we really can honestly explore. Now that doesn't mean that it can't
yeah,
create like harm, if people are making kind of haphazard decisions. And so there are
right.
things that I institute. For example, you cannot replace someone who's in a body that is nothing of what you identify with. So consider your positionality, and therefore, it's the BIPOC people are examining the BIPOC characters,
Mm-hmm.
and our white people are examining the white characters, and we're all kind of in this hypothetical scenario. But so there's a lot of deliberation, to say, and I think that's part of what I am so curious about with Imagine in general, of like, rigor and deliberation and authenticity and honesty, and sometimes structure, but also, again, that fluidity of, well, that didn't work out, or sometimes the facilitator gets yelled at, or something, and like, but that's part of it too. It's what happens, when in dialogue. Well, let's be curious about that. So something, you're frustrated, tell us more, and what do others think, kind of giving it back to the room. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one example,
Yeah.
yeah, about how it's sort of manifesting in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you quickly with children.
Yeah.
Children are just, they run the imagination space, so we are there to learn from them, really. But I have seen children in Safa story, move the play in ways that we had never even imagined. In fact, like, I had a fourth grade girl, I remember, her name was Helen,
Mm-hmm.
and she was very upset with how Safa was being treated, but she wanted first to address Safa to really accompany her and be her friend. And so she stepped into that moment. But then outside of that scene, she was like, I really think I want to go talk to him now. And so then, and that's not a real scene, in that moment. And so we moved her over and we brought him on. And I kind of, for a moment, went into role as a principal to say, Ryan, won't you come this way? So yeah, there's just so much possibility in these, as you said, these imagined spaces. And obviously that also connects with, why we named ourselves Imagine too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, so powerful. And you also, one of the things that you mentioned to me, and it's interesting because this is, I think, the first time I met you was in a space where Shayla James, who has also been featured on this series, had invited us into a conversation about how to care for teaching artists
Yeah.
and how to create more of a supportive community among teaching artists. And I know your work is addressing that a little bit as well. Would you share a little
Yeah.
bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think, again, that links back to, what I was saying of, I I was and am kind of historically a teaching artist and have been for 20 years. And so I feel very curious about how to protect teaching artists, for one, because I think that oftentimes, in my own experience in various institutions that I've been part of, they're perceived as a means to an end, kind of commodified in a way. And, where institutions, hire them, and then they own their lesson, and then they put it on and they are hailed as a wonderful institution for putting on. So one of the things, even just some of that aspect I'm curious about, but so, there's I'm interested in the language of decolonizing, speaking of not commodifying teaching artists and even decentralizing. And so I call us a learning community in which we're there together. I posture myself when I am leading a workshop as a learner always, and with that spaciousness whereby they can always contribute. And also there are lessons that Imagine develops that we create curricula and we will claim ownership on the curriculum that we make. And there are lessons that teaching artists create. And contractually, I've worked it out that they are the owner of their lesson. They have their name on it, and it is their ownership. It's licensed to us because we also want to share the learnings, but it's always credited to them. They can use it anywhere they want, and I don't know. I mean, even if they never use it elsewhere, I think just the knowledge of we want you to own your lesson and we're going to claim that. So there's a protectiveness, I think, around ownership and around representation and knowing when to name them, not sort of taking the credit out of a collaborative, context in which sure we were part of it, but they were part of it, and we are part of it together. And so aside from that, the way that we do observations, I think what I'm curious about when I observe, because I think that can also be a really intimidating thing. And I've been observed as a teaching artist in a way that, someone comes in, they're in the back of the room, and they take a bunch of notes and they leave. They send me an email later or something.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, like, I don't ever want to assume myself to be, the only expert in the space or the lead expert in the space. That I'm there to host a dialogue. And so it always has to be a conversation. I observe and we sit down and I say, how was it for you? And what did you find? And what did you think about the structure of your lesson? And how can I support? And here are some things that I observed. And, I also, we're, as we're new, but I'm hoping that as I build capacity that we can create a peer mediation. Not mediation. I used to be a peer mediator or hold peer mediations, but a peer observation model, in which is based in trusting them, trust the people and they become trustworthy. So I think I try to lead with a lot of trust of like, what are your instincts? And how can I support that? And it doesn't always have to look, the way that I have it in my head as their supervisor, or even the way that I might even feel like is ideal practice from my own vantage point, but really giving them space to explore, to experiment, to own. I think aside from that as well, one of the things that Imagine is interested in is hosting gatherings. I think as a kind of non-traditional theater, our season is going to look a bit different, as an applied theater entity. But I think something that will be part of our seasons is just bringing people together, bringing our community together creatively. So we come together, we have food and drink, we have maybe live music, we have funny theater games that are kind of optional for people if they want to, and we have awkward dance parties, things where we are sort of like just releasing people into a sense of play and hoping to cross mingle. I'm such a big proponent of adult theater games. I think we desperately need them in general, and also I'm a big proponent of theater for non-actors. So how can I really invite, people who have no interest in theater or no background in theater, people of all ages, children and adults, to feel like they can play with us, and so our teaching artists are a part of that. Come and play, come and hang, come be part of a community. We try to really create a sense of community together. So yeah, I think those are some ways that I hope they experience nourishment. I also really work hard to keep myself open to feedback and
Mhm.
to be transparent, you know,
Yeah.
because I think one of the things so often times teaching artists are like, here's a here's a program, do you want to take it or not? But so I like to give them choice and options, what is of interest to you, and even to explain things like, oh, the reason why this program charges or is I has this charge versus that is for these reasons. I'm happy to tell you more,
Mhm.
but so just that sense of transparency, I think, will helps to decolonize and decentralize, in how we work together and exchange together. So
Mhm. Yeah, I really love all the really concrete examples you just gave of how you are leading in that space. And I hope the listeners are able to kind of like hold on to some of those things. You can always go back and rewind when you're watching and just listen,
mm,
because I think that you just named a number of really important things. Um, I have a little bit of training in restorative practices, and one of the big concepts is people are happier and just do better in general when those in authority do things with them
yeah.
rather than to or for them, right? And
Mm,
so, and I think that that's one of the most important things we can do as we're dismantling. There's sort of these hierarchical power structures, and I love how you're just leading in that way of and it's something that's coming up with some of the teams that I work with too, of people kind of living in fear of um, being fired if they like don't get it right, or
mm,
kind of feeling like they're just sort of like a cog in a wheel,
mm,
rather than having that sense of like, I was brought here into this work, into this team, I was hired into this because I have true value, I have something, a unique vantage point or a unique skill set or whatever that I bring to this work, and that's valuable, and I get to stand in that worth
yeah.
and take up space in that. And so I love that you're also leading in a way that encourages that and honors that, and I feel like people show up so much more fully as their best selves with their full creativity, um,
Mm,
when we're able to engage with one another like that. So I
yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I really agree. Mm,
Yeah. Now you had it sounds like you have some kind of larger, a sense of calling and almost like a spiritual approach that you're bringing to this work. And I know you have
mm,
a piece that you'd like to share with us, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that prophetic call that you're and
yeah.
that art invites you to answer, and that all
Yeah.
that juicy stuff we were kind of emailing about. I'd
Yeah, yeah.
love to hear more
Yes,
about that.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'll say, Rochelle, I think that in terms of my own liberation, in starting Imagine, is that I finally feel like I have the ability to integrate spirituality,
Mm,
into my work. And I feel like it's very non-institutional, and sort of it's becoming less taboo, to be honest. I'm happy to see there is receptivity, but but nonetheless, it typically is. And I don't mean religious, I by spirituality, I mean connection. I mean using love in education, and using it as a natural kind of part of this work and what we're doing. I mean, sort of engaging the mystery that happens when people come together and look at each other in the eyes, and saying, wow, we belong to each other. Yeah. And what is that? Why do I feel like I want to tear up? But so there, to
mm,
me, that's what I mean by the
mm,
spiritual, and so that's been really joyful for me. And
mm,
there's the reason why this actually came to me in the middle of the night when we were starting Imagine, to name the company Imagine.
mm,
But there's been a phrase that has influenced my work as an artist, and it's a phrase called the prophetic imagination. And it was actually created by a theologian. His name is Walter Brueggemann. But he would say that, we need prophets. We need prophets to guide us into the possibilities of what can be. And you can even think about people who have been prophets historically, like Martin Luther King Jr., for example. But there's a quality to prophetic work that energizes people. So thinking about theater, like, we can bring joy, we can uplift, we can create connection. We had this gathering on Monday, and people left saying, I feel nourished. Like, we can nourish one another in that. But, and this is, I think, the other quality to the prophetic imagination is not just to energize, but to criticize society. That we need to evaluate, is this working? Are we okay with the hierarchy within a teaching artist institute? Are we okay with the systemic injustices that create inequities among genders and races and all all of the above? And if not, we need to call you in. So as artists can call people in too, right? And so I'm very interested in that activist quality too of the prophetic word. And I'm not afraid to, I within context, I am an activist, and I'm not afraid to rock the boat a little, and so that element of giving joy and creating laughter and reminding us of our common humanity, but also critiquing when we are not okay, we are too lazy right now, or we are stagnating, or we're sitting in a template, of a structure that is not working, and we don't have to be here. We can question this and move into something better. And so, and therefore, as artists who do live in that magical space, who have the ability to bring in people into the imagination, who can show stories and invite stories, we can be those prophetic voices to create beloved community. I think is the ideal, is the final outcome, and what I mean by beloved community, as I've learned it and understood it, especially from civil rights leaders, is it is the place of harmony between, all humans with also nature, humans with earth. It is the ultimate sense of belonging, and restoration and justice. So, and I think in my own practice, I believe that is our intended way of being. We are intended to be connected. We are intended to be restored. We are intended to live in justice, but we're just not there yet. And so we're not, but we can be. So imagine the possibilities of what can be, and how can theater and arts, provoke that imagination. So I can share this piece if that's, unless you have any thoughts.
No, please do. Okay. Go for it.
Yeah. So this piece, I think I wrote it with sort of this in mind, and also wrote it in a way of thinking, what is Imagine about? I think there could be 100 more stanzas to add, and perhaps it will keep taking shape. But for this moment in our birth stages of first sort of 6 months of life, here's what I have so far. Let's just imagine that we wake up each day to center human dignity, insisting that each person is part of me. And when we encounter resistance, we pause, we breathe, we may even rage or grieve. Then we press on in curiosity. Love labors, then refuses to be enemies. We build beloved community. Imagine that we seek to understand rather than be understood. We get to know our neighbor, say hello to a stranger, and when the policy doesn't serve us, we pause. We breathe. We may even rage or grieve. Then we rework it. People first. We deserve it. Imagine that we release ourselves from the need to be perfect, slow down, take breaks, dance to cope. We fight with our hope. Imagine play as purpose, mercy as justice. Imagine forgiveness, even if they don't deserve this, even if we don't deserve this. Imagine us, you and me, here and now. This gathering is no mistake. Awake to this particular time and space, to this cosmos, universe, planets, and galaxies, matter and energy, where we are here and now. Wow. We are here and now. Say it with me. We are here and now. How marvelous. To say it is a coincidence might be a convenience or a missed chance. Go on and imagine. Each day, step outside, behold the sun, feel the wind wrap around you. We are one, and we're going to be all right. Each one of us carries the light. Look within. Imagine.
Ah! Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I felt really honored to sort of be the recipient of that in this conversation, this little space we have here. Mm, so beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
mm, yeah. Yeah, that man, there's so many different things that you're sharing that just I find so important with that role that we play as artists to imagine alternative cultures of care is what another one of my artful leaders called it. And along with that, I think naturally comes that disruption because when we see what is possible, then we see what is not
That's
happening,
right.
right?
Yeah,
And
that's
as we
good.
start to compare, and in some of my work, I'm seeing that
Mm,
happening where in some spaces where we interact, we've created some real beauty. But then now we're looking at other spaces and going, "Ooh, we've got some work to do to
yeah.
shift." And I love that. I don't think I've ever heard a poem like yours just speak about policies, you know, things that are
Throw that in.
like just drilling down to the really specific stuff. and
Yeah.
and in the arts we can hold the space for exploration of all of those things, whether it's a
Yes.
policy or a relationship or a dream of a beautiful new world. Like those things
Mm,
are all interconnected in
they
that.
are. They are actually that. The more I do this work in general, I started our fall season with our teaching artists with some workshops, some trainings, and I was bringing in some of the old favorites of restorative justice and trauma informed or healing centered and
Mhm.
student centered democratic classroom. And as I was sort of putting the workshops out there and together, I felt like this is all integrated. You
Right.
none of these works separately. They're all really one practice. And so I've started really thinking of it that way, and even teaching about it that way. I call it the integrated approach,
Yeah.
to learning and teaching and learning. And I think it helps us to kind of specialize in a workshop that might illuminate, student-centered practices or restorative justice practices. But it really is this very, very much, in the intersections are all over and the
Yeah.
strings are all attached. And I think when we can really do that, we can begin to operate from a very instinctual level,
Hmm.
and I think that's the thing I'm most interested in for our teaching artists is, I don't want them second guessing because they're stuck with this lesson that I wrote, or something. And, but like, I want them to feel like there's a love, there's an instinct, there's an understanding of sort of how to be present in the room. And there's the integrated approach is just kind of there because
Mhm.
we've been working on it and we've been talking about it and we've been practicing it for a few years or
Mhm.
so. Yeah, the interconnectedness, I think, in this work, but I mean in the world in
Yeah.
general as well, but in this work, feels like it's significant, more kind of rising to significance for me in this stage.
Yeah, I really love that you just brought that to the table because for the last 6 months or so, I've had the opportunity to study with Dr. Angel Acosta, who just wrote his his dissertation at Teachers College at Columbia. And his research has really shown that there is a restorative turn happening in education, and that it really comes from all those different approaches, and how like different folks are sort of pulling on these different things, but those things are all leading to a shift in the way that many of us are imagining education and how we're interacting with young people and how we're interacting with teams and caring for ourselves. And it's things from social emotional learning and contemplative and spiritual practices and restorative justice and trauma informed education and somatics and some arts and indigenous and cultural practices, and it's all kind of coming together. And as a trainer, I've had a lot of people be like, "Oh, well, here you come now with now it's trauma informed. The last time it was strength based," and it's like it's
Yeah.
all working together, and these are all things we need in our toolkits, because when we're in front of people, so many different things emerge. And the more we have these different ways of going, ooh, now we're dealing with a trauma, or ooh, now we're dealing with, maybe a restorative kind of situation where some injustice has happened or harm has occurred. Like we
Oh,
just need all those different things to be able to pull on them. And it is
yeah.
a very integrated, and it is a way of being.
Yes. Yes. It is a way of being. It is. I think that's part of it is, and even in terms of how we nurture teaching artists. And I think this is what you've been doing in your work is, we want to be we want to grow. Like
Yeah.
we have to grow as humans. We have to feel healthy and um grounded, and we have to be nourished even with the idea of restoration
Hmm.
and forgiveness, actually. And that's part of it's part of how I teach restorative justice too, is helping us also to think back to a moment where we were not our best selves and where there and what was happening for us in that time. Because a lot of restorative justice is about kind of examining the story behind the story,
Yeah.
and so what about me? When have I not performed well? What was
Yeah.
my story? How can I forgive myself if I haven't let that go? How
Yeah.
can I model the vulnerability here so that we can all feel kind of equipped and empowered together to say, I see you, in your pain. And so, yeah, I mean, that is when I am well, then my instincts to be in the room, to facilitate, to love, to listen well, to respond well, to be curious, to ask a follow-up question, comes naturally. In addition to, as you were saying, having the toolbox of all the various areas, culturally responsive,
Yeah.
when we're in a room where there are cultural dynamics, which there always are.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like one of the things I hear often is just kind of like, tell us the techniques, or like, what are the things we should be doing? And I find so much the more we focus on that, those deeper values of love and that sense of calling, and what is it that we are really here to create, just really empowers us to move from a place that is so much deeper.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I do think I have felt a responsibility to answer the question of what are some of the techniques, and I
Yes.
think, right,
Yes.
which which are often simple. For
Yeah.
example, what's the difference between, because I run now the play program, a social emotional theater 12-week residency, and for middle schools in particular. But what's the difference between a theater class and a social emotional theater class? Is one very key element is simply intentional reflection.
Mm-hmm.
That we're not just sort of bouncing from one theater game to another, that we're pausing, we're
Mm-hmm.
examining ourselves. We are uh, asking why that felt weird
Mm-hmm.
and what does that mean for me, and where I want to be, and what happened to us as a group, not just me, but the group. What are we
Mm-hmm.
noticing as after we did this game versus before, right? I mean, so I
Yeah.
think the practices are there,
Yeah.
and I in our lifelong learning journey, it is the instinct, it is the wellness combined with the things we learn about practices that help us meet certain objectives, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're kind of wrapping up the conversation, you mentioned just noticing the difference when you are well yourself and like how you can show up in the space. And I'm
Mm.
curious, what are your own practices that keep you well and that nourish you as a practitioner, as a facilitator?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, in this new season of running Imagine, and having kind of moved away from old and into this new season, I feel like one thing that's become very important to me is rest. And I think I'm coming from like a decade of workaholism, honestly, and coming out of that sort of frantic there's constantly something to do, and I think it links with the fallacies of white supremacy culture, which says now, urgency, urgency, more programs, more whatever. And so I
Mm,
think just a lot of that letting go too.
yeah.
And even in terms of like, oh, we probably should have, with Imagine, like we're probably should have had like a launch month. We didn't get to it. We're not going to sweat it. Maybe it happens in January, or maybe, our social media is, oh, well, this is the best we have. Just this sort of, I think, just inviting myself into a spirit of letting go and surrender and boundaries. I think that is, speaking of a way of being that is really, that integrates in so many areas. It's about sleep, it's about breath, it's about coming, pausing and ending my day at a reasonable hour as often as I can. I love this quote from Bayo Okomolafi. He's a Nigerian author, spiritual teacher, and he says, "The times are urgent. Let us slow down." We need, because it is tough out there. The world is continues to be difficult. Post pandemic or not, it just is. Our politics, our earth, there is suffering. Our interpersonal lives, I think many of us are just struggling. So it's urgent, and therefore we need to take it slow.
Yeah.
So I also am a big like improvised dancer. So especially when I need to release some like rageful energy, it's good for me to put on music and dance and sort of feel silly. And so I move. I'm learning to grow my practice in meditation. I'm more likely to walk and meditate, which sometimes
Mm,
I need to practice a little bit of stillness, I think. I
mhm.
think. Um, so yeah, some of those. Some of
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah. And as we're sort of leaving our audience today, you, the listener, thank you so much for sticking with us through all of this. It's such a nourishing conversation. Do you have a message or something that you wish educators knew?
Mm. Um, yeah, I think, um, I guess I would say, let's prioritize our own healing and wellness. That feels important to me. I so often feel like there's, we are all carrying insecurity, and and I see it get in our way as educators, even in terms of how we navigate students in the classroom and sometimes how we navigate each other. So um, I hope for the healing of educators, arts educators, all educators. I love classroom teachers. We're always collaborating with them, and I know that they have a deep and heavy burden to in the things they navigate. So let us heal. Let us slow down and let us heal. Is
Mm-hmm.
comes to mind.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your work and your perspective and your calling and your practices with me and with this audience. It's a pleasure, and I definitely look forward to getting to know you and your work better, and seeing how our the threads of our work in our lives might interweave in some way.
Yeah, yeah. Surely they will and do perhaps.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, thank you
Yeah.
all so much for listening. And, if you like these kind of conversations, join the Facebook group, the Empowered Educator Community. You can join these conversations live or just subscribe on YouTube. If you enjoy these kinds of things and you think of artful leaders that could contribute to this conversation, please share this information with them or have them reach out to me. It's been so much fun to just keep kind of connecting the dots, and each person I meet then sends me to some other person, and we're just mapping out so many people who are really a part of this healing work and this moment that I think is so important right now, that we slow down, that we reimagine, and that we call in so that we can really make the change that's needed in our world right now. So thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.